All right, that's the first part of the course done, and now we're moving on to section 2, which is about markets. So let's continue our little hypothetical story. We've got these colonists, they're on a new world, they've got the supercomputer, it figured out how it could create a Pareto efficient allocation, but then when the colonists heard about all the problems, they're like, is there not a better way we can do this? And one of them is sort of saying, well, you know, back my grandparents, before we left Earth, told me about this thing called using markets. So they're like, what are markets? And he's going to explain to them. So, you know, we live and breathe in markets over here, but let's step back for just a few minutes and think about like what actually is a market? What are the ingredients that make a market a market? And for our purposes, we're going to have 4 major ingredients. All right, so the first one is the presence of property rights. So there's a bunch of goods and natural resources and labor and inputs that exist in an economy. In our first section, the supercomputer decided how to use them and allocate them among people. In a sense, we were saying the supercomputer had property rights over all those things, because what property rights are is the ability to decide how something is used, okay? In a market, all the goods of factors of production and all the outputs are assigned, they belong to different people, and those people have property rights over them and can decide how they're used. So, you know, the first thing that our colonists might say is, all right, we're not going to have the computer tell us what to do anymore. Everyone has their own property rights over their own time and labor. So that means that they get to decide how they want to use their own time and their own body. Secondly, there's a bunch of robots, and they might say, well, who gets to decide what happens to these robots? And let's say that they just say, you know, let's divide them up evenly across the people so everybody gets half a share. And maybe they're like partnerships, married couples, I don't know, friends who each jointly own one. And they together have to come up with a way to decide how that thing is going to be used, okay? But somebody else can't take it unless they get permission. Meanwhile, if they're using their robots and labor to grow food or to build a house, they have property rights over those things, and they can decide if they're going to let other people eat the food, come into their house to live, whatever. But it's not just that everybody is in charge of their own body and in charge of their own robots, and they're just sort of this little isolated, tiny economy. No, because what we're going to do is we're going to allow voluntary exchange. So even though everyone has property rights, that doesn't mean that that's the only person who uses those things. I can exchange my robot for your house. I can exchange some of my labor, like some time, in exchange for you to give me something, and so on. And what makes, you know, this important, or an important distinction, is that in a economy or in a market economy, all of these exchanges are voluntary. If I offer you a deal, like a trade, you give me your robot, I give you this carrot, you're free to say, that's a terrible deal and I'm not going to do that, okay? And I can't force you to do it. Hanging over all of this is some kind of government or rule of law that's enforcing property rights and enforcing sort of the rules of the market. So you can't just take things. All right, so voluntary exchange. The third ingredient is a unit of account, which we're going to call money, and the use of prices. Now, these things are not like strictly necessary. You could have a thing where you bargain over money, but for this section of the course, we're going to assume that there's just prices out there. And what does that mean? It means that it's not so much like you give me your robot for this carrot, I give you this house for 3 days of your labor. We're not going to bargain and barter in terms of actual goods. Everything is going to get collapsed down to sort of a single unit that's exchanged and traded, a form of money, okay? So what's money? Well, money is the thing that people will accept in exchange for other goods universally, okay? It can be cigarettes if you're in a prison camp and people have decided that that's going to be like the thing they're going to use. It can be a shiny metal that people like gold or silver. It can be Bitcoin, an electronic sort of protocol that people just has no inherent value, but people will accept in exchange for other goods. We're not going to concern ourselves with too much with that. We're going to sort of say that there's this thing that you can denote any good or service in terms of it. So you can put a price on anything. You can, put a dollar value on anything or a value in money, and that value or sort of becomes the price, and instead of negotiating and bargaining, we just use prices for everything. All right, so it's not like I negotiate with you and haggle back and forth about whether you're going to do this or that. I just have a price for, say, my labor, and if you're willing to pay the price, then I'm willing to work for you because I've set the price at a level where I'll do what you ask. And if you're not willing to pay the price, you don't. We still have this voluntary exchange, but now everything is simplified to just, there's a price on everything, and you decide based on the price whether you're going to use that, rent it, or so on. The last piece of the puzzle is the presence of firms, which we'll talk about in the next video. But essentially, firms are organizations that create outputs, goods that people want or other firms want, by using inputs. And they get their inputs by purchasing them from the market, and they take their outputs and sell those on the market as well. So that's the basics, and we're going to see now in this unit how, under the right conditions, markets work really well, and it's going to be a great move for these colonists to use a market to allocate their resources. But in the third section of this course, we'll show that there are a lot of caveats to that.